Today we take a look at the World War II mission so dangerous, they never tried it again. Operation Tidal Wave. August 1st, 1943. 178 American B-24 Liberator bombers thunder across the Mediterranean, flying so low that Mediterranean fishermen can see the faces of the crews. Their destination, the heart of Nazi Europe's oil production, the heavily defended refineries of PLOESTI, Romania. What happened next would go down as one of the most heroic and costliest missions in Air Force history. Of those 1788 bombers, only 92 would return. 532 American airmen would be killed, wounded, or captured. 5 Medals of Honor would be awarded, more than any other single mission in World War II. The mission was so dangerous, so costly, and so controversial that Allied command would never attempt anything like it again. Yet it had to be tried, because the fate of the entire war hung in the balance. Welcome to Chapters in History. Hit that subscribe button. We have the best chapters in history than anyone. Today, we're climbing into the cockpit of Operation Tidal Wave, the mission that sent American bombers into hell itself, all to strike at the one target that could cripple Nazi Germany's war machine. This is the story of the day heroism and horror collided over the oil fields of Romania. Chapter 1. The Target. To understand why 1788 bombers were sent on a suicide mission, you have to understand one simple fact. Armies run on oil. Without fuel, tanks become monuments, aircraft become scrap metal, and navies become floating museums. By 1943, Nazi Germany was running on fumes. The Wehrmacht had conquered most of Europe, but conquest doesn't create oil. It only increases demand. German forces were stretched from the Arctic to North Africa, and every mile of advance required more precious fuel. Romania's Ploiești oil fields were Hitler's lifeline. These 9 refineries produced 60% of Germany's crude oil and refined petroleum products. Without Ploiești, the German war machine would grind to a halt within months. Allied intelligence knew this. If they could destroy Ploiești, they could cripple Germany's ability to wage war. But there was a problem. Ploiești was 1,400 miles from the nearest Allied base, deep in the heart of Nazi-occupied territory. The plan that emerged was audacious beyond belief. Instead of the typical high-altitude bombing runs, the B-24s would fly at treetop level, below German radar, to achieve complete surprise. They would strike all 9 refineries simultaneously in a coordinated attack that would maximize damage. But flying at low altitude meant the bombers would be sitting ducks for anti-aircraft fire. They would have no fighter escort for most of the mission, and they would be attacking the most heavily defended target in southeastern Europe. The mission planners knew the risks. They estimated losses at 50%, meaning half the airmen who took off might never return. But the potential payoff was worth it. Knock out Ploiești, and you knock out Germany's ability to fight. Chapter 2. The Approach. August 1st, 1943. 784 liberators lift off from bases around Benghazi, Libya. Each bomber carries a crew of 10 men and 4,000 pounds of bombs. The formation stretches for miles across the North African sky. These weren't just aircraft. They were flying communities. Each B-24 had a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, engineer, radio operator, and 4 gummers. Young men, mostly in their early 20s, who had volunteered for one of the most dangerous jobs in the war. The plan was precision itself. 5 groups of bombers would approach Ploiești from different directions, hitting specific refineries simultaneously. Surprise was everything. If the Germans knew they were coming, the mission would become a slaughter. But things started going wrong almost immediately. Navigation errors scattered the formation. Radio silence meant groups couldn't coordinate. Weather obscured landmarks. By the time they reached Romania, the carefully planned attack was already falling apart. The lead group, commanded by Colonel Keith Compton, missed a crucial turn. Instead of approaching from the south as planned, they were coming in from the north, directly over Bucharest, one of the most heavily defended cities in Europe. German radar operators watched in disbelief as nearly 200 American bombers appeared on their screens. Air raid sirens screamed across Romania. Fighter squadrons scrambled. Anti-aircraft batteries swung their guns toward the sky. The element of surprise, the one thing the mission depended on, was gone. Chapter 3. Hell over PLOESTI. What happened next was unlike anything in aviation history. The B-24s, now flying at 200 feet above the ground, roared toward their targets through a wall of anti-aircraft fire that turned the sky black with exploding shells. The first group, led by Colonel John "Killer" Kane, pressed on despite the lost element of surprise. Flying so low, they had to pull up to avoid chimneys. They dropped their bombs on the Columbia Aquila refinery. The facility erupted in flames that could be seen for miles. But the cost was devastating. German fighters dove on the low-flying bombers like hawks on rabbits. The famous Liberandose group, led by Colonel Leon Johnson, lost bomber after bomber as they approached their target. Johnson himself flew through a wall of fire so intense that his aircraft was hit by debris from his own bombs. Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker's bomber, Hell's Wench, was hit by anti-aircraft fire and caught fire. Any sane pilot would have turned back or bailed out. Instead, Baker continued toward his target, his burning aircraft becoming a torch in the sky. Baker and his co-pilot, Major John Jerstad, held their disintegrating bomber level long enough to drop their bombs on the target. Then, Hell's Wench exploded in a fireball that lit up the Romanian countryside. Both men would posthumously receive the Medal of Honor. But perhaps the most incredible moment came when Colonel John Kane's group approached the Concordia Vega refinery. The facility was already burning from previous attacks, and flying through the flames and smoke would be certain death. Kane led his bombers directly into the inferno. Aircraft disappeared into walls of flame and smoke, their crews trusting in their training and their luck. Most emerged from the other side, their paint burned off, their crews half blind from smoke, but their bombs delivered. The sky over PLOESTI had become a vision of hell, burning aircraft falling from the sky, massive explosions as refineries went up in flames, parachutes of survivors drifting down into enemy territory, the smell of burning oil and aviation fuel mixing with smoke and death. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. By the time the last B-24 cleared Romanian airspace, the cost was already becoming clear. Of the 178 bombers that had taken off that morning, 54 were gone. Some shot down by fighters, others destroyed by anti-aircraft fire, still others crashing from battle damage. 532 American airmen were killed, wounded, or captured. It was the heaviest single-day loss in 8th Air Force history. Entire crews, friends who had trained together, flown together, and died together, were wiped out in minutes. The survivors who made it back to North Africa told stories that sounded like fiction. Aircraft landing with hundreds of bullet holes. Crews who had flown through their own bomb explosions. Pilots who had navigated by following the smoke plumes of burning aircraft ahead of them. But had it been worth it? Initial reconnaissance suggested the mission was a complete success. The refineries were burning, production was halted, and Germany's oil supply was critically damaged. The truth was more complex. While the attack had caused significant damage, Romanian and German engineers worked around the clock to repair the facilities. Within months, PLOESTI was producing almost as much oil as before the raid. The strategic impact was limited. The human cost was devastating. And the lesson was clear. Some targets, no matter how important, simply couldn't be destroyed by conventional bombing. Operation Tidal Wave would never be repeated. The losses were too high, the risks too great, and the results too uncertain. Future missions would rely on high-altitude bombing and fighter escorts, trading surprise for survival. Conclusion: never again. 5 medals of honor were awarded for Operation Tidal Wave, more than any other single mission in World War II. Colonel Leon Johnson, Colonel John Kane, Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker, Major John Jerstad, and Second Lieutenant Lloyd Hughes all received the nation's highest award for valor. But the real measure of the mission wasn't in medals or strategic objectives. It was in the courage of ordinary young men who flew into hell because their country asked them to. These were college students and farm boys, mechanics and teachers, who had volunteered for the most dangerous job in the war. They knew the risks, understood the odds, and went anyway, because they believed in something bigger than themselves. The bombers that returned to North Africa carried more than just survivors. They carried the spirit of a generation that refused to accept defeat. Men who had looked death in the face and chosen duty over self-preservation. Today, when we talk about greatest generation, we often think of D-Day or the Battle of the Bulge. But we should also remember August 1st, 1943, when 178 American bombers flew into the heart of Nazi Europe on a mission so dangerous it was never attempted again. Operation Tidal Wave failed as a strategic mission, but succeeded as something more important. Proof that when freedom is threatened, there will always be those willing to pay any price to defend it. The mission was so dangerous, they never tried it again. The men who flew it were so brave, they'll never be forgotten. In the end, Operation Tidal Wave teaches us that heroism isn't about success or failure. It's about the willingness to risk everything for something greater than yourself. And on that August day in 1943, 1,780 American airmen proved that such courage still exists in the world. This has been Chapters in History. Subscribe for more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when the stakes were highest and the costs were greatest.